500 milligrams of valacyclovir. I stood in the dim light of our garage, holding the foiled blister pack between my thumb and forefinger. I didn't need my 30 years in the biotech industry to know what this was. I didn't need to consult a doctor to understand the dosage. 2 pills a day. This wasn't for a cold sore on the lip. This was suppression therapy. My heart didn't race. It stopped. It felt like the concrete floor beneath my feet had simply dissolved, leaving me suspended in a cold, black void. "Honey, did you find them?" Lucas's voice drifted from the driveway, cheerful and oblivious. My husband, 50 years old, yet he still had the boyish charm that had captivated me 10 years ago. He was waiting for his car keys. He was late for a private coaching session at the club, or so he said. I looked down at his tennis bag, unzipped, chaotic, smelling faintly of sweat and grip tape. I had only reached in to find his key fob, which he claimed was buried at the bottom. Instead, my fingers had grazed this crinkled packet hidden inside the side pocket, tucked beneath a spare wristband. The prescription label was missing. He had peeled it off. That was the first dagger. The second was the realization that the packet was half empty. I am 57 years old. I am a senior vice president at a major pharmaceutical firm. I manage risk for a living. I analyze data, predict failures, and cut losses before they destroy a project. But standing there, staring at those blue pills, I realized I had been the biggest failure of my own career. I had been sleeping in the same bed as this man. I had let him touch me. I had let him risk my health, my life, because he couldn't keep his zipper up, and worse, he was too cowardly to tell me the truth. "Kat, everything okay?" Footsteps. He was coming closer. Panic flared hot and sharp. If I confronted him now, he would lie. Lucas was a master of the unforced error. He'd panic, deny, gaslight me, and then beg. He would say it was a mistake, or that I was crazy. He would use my age against me, tell me I was being paranoid because I was older and insecure. No, I wouldn't give him that satisfaction. I shoved the blister pack back into the side pocket, exactly where I found it, sliding the wristband over it to conceal the evidence. My hands were trembling, but I forced them to close around the leather key fob lying at the bottom of the bag. I turned around just as Lucas jogged into the garage. He looked good. At 50, he had maintained his athlete's physique. Lean, tanned, with just enough gray in his hair to look distinguished. He wore his white tennis whites like a uniform of innocence. "Found them," I said. My voice sounded hollow to my own ears, like it was coming from underwater, but he didn't notice. "You're a lifesaver," he grinned, taking the keys from my hand. He leaned in to kiss me. Instinctively I flinched, just a fraction of an inch. A micro-movement. He paused, his brow furrowing slightly. "You okay? You look a little pale." "Just a headache," I lied. "Migraine coming on." "Take some rest, babe. I'll be back by 6. Love you." He kissed my cheek. His lips felt like a branding iron. I held my breath, fighting the urge to scrub my skin raw. I watched him climb into his SUV, the engine roaring to life, filling the garage with exhaust and entitlement. He reversed out, gave me a little wave, and drove off to meet whoever she was. I stood there in the silence of the empty garage. The smell of exhaust fumes lingered in the air. I walked over to the trash can in the corner and dry heaved. Nothing came out but a guttural sob that I choked back down immediately. He had exposed me to a disease. He had shattered our vows. But worst of all, he had underestimated me. He saw an older woman who was grateful to have a younger, handsome husband. He saw a bank account. He saw a safety net. He didn't see the scientist. And he certainly didn't see the predator I was about to become. I walked back into the house, went straight to the kitchen, and picked up my phone. I didn't call a lawyer. Not yet. I called Dr. Samuel West, my oldest friend and the head of infectious diseases at Mass General. "Sam," I said, my voice steady now, cold as steel. "I need you to run a full panel on me. Everything. And I need it off the books. Tonight." The waiting game had begun, and Lucas had no idea he had already lost the match. There is no sound more humiliating than the crinkle of a paper gown in a quiet exam room. I sat on the edge of the table, shivering slightly despite the temperature-controlled air. I was 57 years old. I managed a division responsible for billions of dollars in pharmaceutical assets. I commanded boardrooms. Yet, here I was, stripped of my silk blouse and tailored slacks, reduced to a trembling body waiting to be inspected for a disease my husband likely contracted from a 20-something-year-old. The door opened, and Dr. Samuel West walked in. Sam had been my friend since grad school. He had seen me through my first marriage's divorce, my career ascendance, and my breast cancer scare 5 years ago. But he had never seen me like this. "The labs are rushing the blood work, Kat," Sam said, his voice low and gentle. He didn't look at me with pity, which I appreciated. He looked at me with clinical concern. "But based on what you told me, the dosage you found?" 500 milligrams, I repeated, staring at the sterile white tiles on the floor. "Twice a day." Sam sighed, leaning against the counter. "That's an outbreak dosage, Catherine, not maintenance. If he's taking that much, he's currently active. He's contagious." I closed my eyes. A wave of revulsion washed over me, stronger than before. I thought of the last week. Had we? No. Thank God I had been traveling for work, but the risk, the sheer disregard for my safety. "I need to know if I have it, Sam." "We'll know by tomorrow morning," he promised. "But physically, looking at you now, you seem asymptomatic. That's a good sign." He paused, then lowered his voice further. "I checked the insurance database. Just a quick look. There haven't been any claims under his name for this medication." "He paid cash," I said, the realization clicking into place like a puzzle piece. "He went to a walk-in clinic and paid cash so it wouldn't show up on our joint statement." "He's covering his tracks," Sam said. "Smart." "Not smart enough," I replied, sliding off the table. The paper gown tore slightly. "He left the receipt in the bag?" "No. He peeled the label off, but he left the blister pack. He's sloppy, Sam. He thinks I'm too old to notice. He thinks I'm just the bank." I dressed quickly behind the curtain. When I stepped out, buttoning my blouse, the fragile victim was gone. The executive was back. "Keep this off the main system," I told Sam. "I don't want a digital trail yet." "Patient confidentiality is my religion," Sam said, squeezing my shoulder. "But Kat, if the test is positive—" "If it is," I said, my voice devoid of emotion, "then he won't just lose his marriage, he'll lose his freedom." I left the clinic and sat in my car in the parking lot. The dashboard clock read 8:45 p.m. Lucas would be home soon. I pulled out my phone, but I didn't open my messages. I opened the banking app for our joint checking account. This was the account used for household expenses, groceries, utilities, the mortgage on the summer house. I scrolled back through the last 3 months. ATM withdrawal, $400. ATM withdrawal, $400. Venmo transfer, tennis supplies, $250. ATM withdrawal, $500. It was a pattern. Small enough not to trigger a fraud alert, frequent enough to bleed us dry slowly, thousands of dollars in cash withdrawals. A man who makes a healthy salary as a private coach shouldn't need this much walking around money, unless he was paying for dinners he couldn't expense, gifts he couldn't explain, or medical treatments he couldn't claim. I took screenshots of everything, every line item, every date. Then, I switched to my private investment portfolio, the one Lucas knew existed but had no access to. I initiated a transfer of the emergency liquid funds into a new trust account I had set up years ago for potential liabilities. Lucas was no longer my husband. In my mind, he had been reclassified. He was now a liability, a toxic asset. And in my line of work, when you find a toxic asset, you don't just sell it. You isolate it, you starve it, and you liquidate it. I started the engine. I was going home to cook dinner. I would smile, I would ask him about his day, and I would watch him lie to my face, knowing that with every word, he was digging his own grave a little deeper. The sound of a tennis ball hitting a racket is distinct, a sharp, rhythmic pop that usually signaled leisure and wealth. Today, it sounded like a countdown. I arrived at the club around 4 p.m. I hadn't told Lucas I was coming. Usually, I was buried in meetings at this hour, managing crises that involved FDA regulations and stock prices. Today, my crisis was sitting at the front desk of the clubhouse, wearing a pastel polo shirt that was 2 sizes too small. I walked onto the terrace overlooking the clay courts. I ordered a sparkling water with lime from the server, keeping my sunglasses on. From here, I had a perfect view of Court 3. Lucas was there. He was wrapping up a lesson with a heavy-set man in his 60s, but his attention was drifting. He kept glancing toward the pro shop entrance. Then, she walked out. "Brianna." I knew her name because I paid the club membership dues that covered her salary. She couldn't have been more than 24. She had a high, bouncy ponytail and the kind of effortless, unblemished skin that no amount of expensive cream can replicate after 50. She was holding a clipboard, walking toward Lucas with a strut that didn't belong on a tennis court. I watched, frozen behind my dark lenses. Lucas's entire posture changed when he saw her. The fatigue slumped off his shoulders. He stood taller, sucked in his gut, and flashed that blinding, boyish grin, the one that used to be reserved for me. She handed him the clipboard and their fingers brushed. It wasn't an accident, it was a caress, a lingering, familiar touch that lasted 3 seconds too long. Lucas laughed at something she said, leaning in close, invading her personal space in a way that screamed intimacy. I felt a phantom ache in my chest. It wasn't just jealousy, it was grief. I was grieving the man who used to look at me like that. Now, when he looked at me, he saw a roommate, a financier, a nurse. I signaled the waiter. Actually, change that. A bottle of the Pinot Noir, and 3 glasses. I'll be joining my husband. I walked down the stone steps to the court level just as Lucas and Brianna were walking back. Catherine? Lucas stopped dead in his tracks. The color drained from his face, replaced instantly by a flushed, guilty heat. What are you doing here? I thought you had the board meeting. It got rescheduled, I lied smoothly. I looked at Brianna. Up close, she was pretty in a common, unfinished way. She chewed gum with her mouth slightly open. Hello, Brianna? Keeping him organized? Oh, hi, Mrs. Hale? She chirped, her voice gratingly high. She didn't look me in the eye. She looked at my shoes, then my bag, sizing me up. Just going over the weekend schedule. Wonderful, I said, stepping between them. I placed a hand on Lucas's arm. I felt his muscles tense under the fabric of his white shirt. I decided to treat us to a drink. Join us, Brianna. I'm sure you're thirsty after watching him work all day. I have to get back to the desk, she stammered, looking at Lucas for help. He wouldn't meet her gaze. Coward. Nonsense. Just for a moment, I insisted. We sat at a small iron table near the court. I poured the wine. I watched Brianna take a sip, leaving a greasy, pink smear of lip gloss on the rim of the crystal glass. It looked vulgar against the fine stemware. So, Brianna, I said, taking a slow sip of my own wine. Lucas tells me you're studying. What is it? Marketing. Cosmetology, she corrected, fidgeting with her coaster. I want to open my own salon someday. Ambitious, I smiled. It didn't reach my eyes. It takes a lot of capital to start a business. You need a very strong backer. I saw Lucas choke slightly on his wine. He knew exactly what I was talking about. He knew I handled the money. He knew he didn't have a dime of his own to give her to start a lemonade stand, let alone a salon. I guess, Brianna mumbled. I sat there for 20 minutes, playing the role of the benevolent matriarch, while my husband sweated through his shirt and his mistress stared at the exit. I saw the glances they exchanged, panic, confusion. They felt caught, but they didn't know how caught they were. Eventually, Brianna excused herself. She's a sweet girl, I said to Lucas once she was gone, tracing the rim of my glass. A little young, though. Doesn't have much substance yet. Lucas laughed nervously. Yeah, just a kid. Reliable employee, though. I'm sure, I said. I looked at the glass Brianna had left behind. The pink stain was still there, drying on the glass. I stood up. I have a headache, Lucas. I'm going home. Don't stay out too late. You know how easily you get tired these days. I walked away, leaving him sitting alone with the empty bottle and the stained glass. I didn't look back. I had confirmed what I needed to know. It wasn't just sex. It was a pathetic fantasy. He was playing the hero for a girl who wanted a sugar daddy, using money that belonged to his wife. The nausea was gone. The plan was solidifying. He wanted to be the big man? Fine. I would show him exactly how small he really was. The restaurant was loud, filled with the low roar of business dinners and the clatter of silverware. We sat by the window, looking out at the dark water of the harbor. Lucas was working his way through a large lobster, cracking the shell with an enthusiasm that turned my stomach. Butter glistened on his chin. He looked like a man without a care in the world, a man who thought his wife was none the wiser about the secret life he was funding with her money. This is amazing, babe, he said, dipping a claw into the ramekin. We should come here more often. We should, I agreed, taking a small sip of water. I hadn't touched my meal. Actually, Lucas, I wanted to talk to you about something. It's a bit dry, I'm afraid. Just some corporate housekeeping. He stopped chewing, a flicker of wariness in his eyes. Housekeeping? Like bills? No, nothing like that, I laughed softly, waving a hand to dismiss his worry. It's the company. The board is doing a massive audit this quarter. Because of my position as senior VP, they're scrutinizing all assets linked to my household. It's a headache. I reached into my tote bag and pulled out a thick blue folder. I placed it on the table, right next to the discard bowl of lobster shells. What is it? He asked, wiping his hands on a napkin. It's a temporary waiver, I lied. The lie tasted smooth on my tongue. Essentially, it separates your personal liability from my corporate stock options. If the stock crashes, or if the audit finds any irregularities, this protects you from being sued for my company's debts. It also, and this is the good part, lowers our joint taxable income significantly. Lucas's ears perked up at the word taxable. He didn't understand finance, but he understood that taxes meant less money for him. So, it saves us money? About $40,000 this year, I said. I was thinking, once this audit clears next month, we could take that savings and finally put the down payment on that new SUV you've been looking at. Or maybe upgrade your club membership. The bait was taken. I watched the greed wash over his face, suppressing the caution. He wanted a new car. He wanted to impress Brianna. And $40,000 sounded like a fortune to a man who lived on an allowance. And I just have to sign? He asked, reaching for the folder. Just sign the last page. It's standard legal jargon, I said, handing him a heavy pen. I held my breath. The document inside wasn't a liability waiver. It was a post-nuptial amendment. By signing it, he was acknowledging that any future earnings from my stock options were sole property, and more importantly, he was waiving his right to spousal support in the event of a divorce triggered by infidelity or gross misconduct. The text was there, in black and white, but I knew Lucas. He never read the terms and conditions. He skimmed. He flipped to the back page. He hesitated for a second. Should I have a lawyer look at this? My heart hammered against my ribs. You can, I said, keeping my voice indifferent. I took a sip of water. But the audit deadline is tomorrow morning. If we don't file it by noon, the assets get frozen for review, and we lose the tax break. It's up to you, honey. I just thought you'd want the cash flow. The threat of frozen assets, meaning no access to the credit cards, terrified him more than the legal jargon. No, I trust you, he said quickly. You're the genius with this stuff, Kat. He clicked the pen. He signed his name with a flourish. Lucas Hale. He pushed the folder back to me. Done. So, about that SUV? I closed the folder and slipped it back into my bag. It felt heavy, like a weapon. Let's get through the audit first, I smiled. But yes, I think you deserve a reward. I signaled the waiter for the check. Lucas went back to his lobster, sucking the meat out of the leg. I looked at him, a man who had just signed away his golden parachute for the promise of a car he would never drive. He had traded his future for a phantom. You have a little butter, I said softly, pointing to his cheek. Right there. He wiped it off, grinning at me. Thanks, babe. Don't thank me, I thought. You have no idea what I just did to you. The master bedroom used to be my sanctuary. It was the one place where the noise of the boardrooms and the demands of the shareholders couldn't reach me. Now, it felt like a quarantine zone. I sat at the vanity, slowly wiping the makeup from my face. The mirror reflected a woman who looked tired. Not the fatigue of a long day, but the deep, bone-weary exhaustion of holding up a facade. I traced the lines around my eyes. Lucas had once told me he loved those lines. He said they were proof of a life well lived. Now I wondered if he looked at them and just saw an expiration date. The bathroom door opened. A cloud of steam billowed out, carrying the scent of mint body wash. Lucas stepped out, a towel wrapped low around his waist. You're still up? He asked, his voice soft, dropping an octave. It was his seduction voice. I knew it well. Just winding down, I said, screwing the lid back onto my night cream with deliberate slowness. He walked up behind me. I saw his reflection in the mirror before I felt him. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs kneading the tension in my neck. His skin was warm, damp from the shower. Under normal circumstances, I would have leaned into his touch. But tonight, his hands felt like contaminants. My skin crawled. My mind flashed back to the blister pack in the garage, valacyclovir. The virus living in his system, the secrets living in his phone. "You seem tense, Kat," he murmured, bending down to kiss the curve of my neck. I held my breath. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to shove him away, to scrub the spot where his lips touched. "It's the audit," I lied, standing up abruptly to break the contact. "My head is pounding, Lucas. It's been a brutal day." I walked over to the bed and pulled back the duvet. I made sure to grab the thickest book on my nightstand, building a physical wall between us. Lucas looked disappointed, but he didn't push. He dropped the towel and pulled on his boxers. I averted my eyes. I couldn't look at him naked. Not anymore. The body I used to adore now seemed like a biological weapon. He climbed into bed beside me. The mattress dipped under his weight. He shifted closer, draped an arm over my waist, and nuzzled into my back. "I miss you," he whispered against my ear. "We haven't, in a while." The audacity took my breath away. He missed me? Or did he miss the validation of knowing he could still perform for his wife after spending his energy on a 24-year-old? "I know," I said, my voice tight. "Just not tonight, Lucas, please." He sighed, a heavy, petulant sound, and rolled over to his side of the bed. "Fine. Good night." "Good night." I turned off the lamp, plunging the room into darkness. I lay there, staring at the ceiling, listening to his breathing slow down and deepen into sleep. The silence was deafening. I was lying inches away from the man I had vowed to love in sickness and in health. But he had broken the contract first. He had brought the sickness to our doorstep and hidden it. I shifted to the very edge of the mattress, putting as much distance between us as possible without falling off. I pulled the sheet up to my chin. In the dark, a single tear escaped, hot and angry. I wiped it away immediately. I wouldn't cry for him. I was grieving the death of my marriage. Yes. But more than that, I was terrified. How many times had he put me at risk before I found the pills? How many times had he come home from her and climbed into this bed? I listened to the wind rattling the window pane. It was going to be a long night. But as I lay there, wide awake, my resolve hardened like concrete. He thought I was cold tonight? He had no idea what winter looked like. And winter was coming for him. I sat in my car, parked in the far corner of the shopping center garage. The engine was off, the interior silent. My phone buzzed in my lap, 3 short vibrations. It was the notification I had been waiting for. I had hired a private investigator 3 days ago. Not because I didn't trust my own eyes, but because in a divorce proceeding, my eyes are subjective. High-resolution photographs are evidence. I unlocked the phone and opened the secure folder. The first photo was grainy, taken from a distance. It showed Lucas and Brianna walking out of a high-end department store. They were holding hands. He was carrying the bags, large, glossy shopping bags that screamed expensive. I swiped to the next photo. This one was clearer. They were laughing. Lucas had his head thrown back, that carefree laugh I hadn't heard in years. Brianna was looking up at him with adoration, or perhaps with the satisfaction of a woman who knows she's winning. But it was the third photo that made the air in the car feel thin. They weren't looking at jewelry. They weren't looking at shoes. They were standing in the window display of a boutique that sold baby furniture. Lucas was pointing at a crib, a white, vintage-style crib. I zoomed in. Brianna's hand was resting on her stomach. It was a subtle gesture, perhaps subconscious, or perhaps performative. She wasn't showing yet. She was too thin for that, but the intent was undeniable. My stomach dropped. This wasn't just a midlife crisis fling. This wasn't just about sex. This was a replacement strategy. Lucas at 50 was trying to start over. He wanted a do-over family, a young wife, a new baby, a second chance at the youth he felt slipping away. And the most nauseating part? He intended to fund this new life with my money. A notification from my banking app popped up at the top of the screen, confirming my suspicion. Transaction alert. $1,250 department store name. He was buying baby gear on the supplementary credit card I gave him for emergencies. I stared at the screen until my vision blurred. I thought about the years I had spent building our life. The fertility treatments we had tried in our 40s that failed. The way he had held me when I cried, telling me that we were enough, that he didn't need anything else. He had lied. He had always wanted more. He just waited until he found someone younger to give it to him. I didn't scream. I didn't throw the phone. A cold, hard calm settled over me. It was the same feeling I got before a hostile takeover in the boardroom. The emotions evaporated, leaving only the objective. If there was a child involved, things would get messy. Judges could be sympathetic to a new father. He would try to fight for the house, for cash flow, claiming he had dependents to support. I needed to move the timeline up. I dialed the number for the event coordinator at the Vineyard House. "Hello? It's Catherine Hale," I said, my voice smooth and authoritative. "Yes, I need to confirm the catering for this weekend, and I need you to add 2 more seats to the dinner table." "Oh, wonderful. Who are the additional guests?" the coordinator asked. "Lucas's parents," I said. "It's going to be a family reunion. I want everything to be perfect. We have a big announcement to make." "Of course, Mrs. Hale. We'll make it special." "Please do," I said. "It will be a night they never forget." I hung up. I looked at the photo of the crib one last time before deleting it from my main gallery. Lucas wanted a family? Fine. I would give him a family gathering. I would bring everyone together, his parents, his wife, and I would burn his fantasy to the ground in front of the only people whose opinion he actually cared about. He was buying a crib. I was preparing a coffin for his reputation. The ferry ride to the island was usually my favorite part of the summer. I loved the salt spray, the cry of the gulls, and the physical sensation of leaving the mainland and its problems behind. Today, however, the water looked gray and churning, mirroring the pit in my stomach. Lucas stood at the railing of the ferry, wind whipping through his hair. He looked vibrant, energized by the prospect of a weekend where he believed he would be handed the keys to a new kingdom. He thought we were celebrating the tax waiver and a new investment in his career. I sat inside the car, watching him through the windshield. He was texting, probably her. Probably telling Brianna that the old ball and chain was finally loosening the purse strings. When we docked and drove to the house, the gravel driveway crunched under the tires of our SUV. The house stood on a bluff overlooking the ocean, a sprawling, shingled sanctuary that I had bought 5 years before I even met Lucas. It was my house. He just lived in it. "God, I love this place," Lucas sighed, killing the engine. He turned to me, placing a hand on my knee. "We should spend more time here, Kat. Maybe I could cut back on the coaching hours next year. We could travel." I looked at his hand on my knee. I didn't flinch this time. I just smiled, a thin, tight expression. "We'll see," I said. "Let's get the bags inside. Your parents will be here within the hour." Getting the house ready was a mechanical process. I opened the windows to let the sea breeze in, arranged the fresh hydrangeas in the vases, and set the long dining table. At 5 p.m., a taxi pulled up. Frank and Helen, Lucas's parents, spilled out. They were good people, retired school teachers who had always treated me with a reverence that bordered on embarrassing. They thought their son had won the lottery with me, and in many ways, he had. "Catherine!" Helen cried, hugging me tightly. She smelled of lavender and talcum powder. "Oh, you look wonderful, dear. Doesn't she look wonderful, Frank?" "Spectacular," Frank agreed, shaking my hand warmly. "Thank you for having us." "Lucas said you had big news?" I glanced at Lucas, who was bringing their suitcases in. He winked at me, thinking the news was about his new financial freedom. "Yes," I said, smoothing down my dress. "We have a lot to discuss tonight." The evening began with a deceptive warmth. We sat on the back deck, watching the sunset bleed purple and orange across the horizon. Lucas poured wine for everyone. When he got to my glass, I covered the rim with my hand. "Just water for me tonight," I said. "On a celebration night?" Lucas teased. "I want to keep a clear head," I replied. I watched him drink. I watched him charm his parents, telling stories about the club, omitting the parts where he spent his afternoons in the back office with a 24-year-old. He played the part of the successful, doting husband perfectly. It was a performance deserving of an award. "You know," Lucas said, leaning back in his chair, looking at the ocean. "I feel like this is a new chapter for us, for all of us. I've been thinking a lot about legacy lately." Legacy. The word hung in the air, heavy and ironic. He was thinking about the baby crib I saw on his phone. He was thinking about replacing me while sitting on my deck, drinking my wine in front of the parents who adored me. The rage flared up, hot and blinding, but I tamped it down. Not yet. Dinner is served, I announced, standing up. Let's go inside. We moved to the dining room. The table was set with my grandmother's china. The roast was perfect. The candles flickered, casting long shadows against the walls. Before we eat, Lucas said, tapping his glass with a fork. He stood up, beaming. I just want to say thank you to my beautiful wife, Catherine. You've made everything possible for me, and I'm so excited for what we're going to build next. He looked at me with wet, sincere eyes. He actually believed his own lies. He thought he could have it all. The wife, the money, the mistress, the baby. I stayed seated. I reached under the table and pulled out a large, manila envelope I had taped to the underside of my chair. That was beautiful, Lucas, I said. My voice was quiet, but it carried across the room like a gunshot. But I think we have different definitions of what comes next. The room went silent. Frank and Helen looked from him to me, sensing the sudden drop in temperature. Lucas's smile faltered. Cat? He asked. What's that? This, I said, placing the envelope on the white tablecloth, is the legacy you were just talking about. The trap was sprung. There was no way out now. The envelope sat on the white tablecloth like a landmine. For a moment, nobody moved. The only sound was the rhythmic thrum of the ocean crashing against the bluffs outside, a stark contrast to the suffocating silence inside the dining room. What is this, Catherine? Lucas asked, his laugh nervous, brittle. Some kind of joke? Open it, I said, picking up my water glass. It's the investment portfolio you were so excited about. Lucas reached out. His hand shook slightly, a tremor he couldn't hide. He slid his finger under the flap and pulled out the contents. Photographs spilled out first. They fanned across the table, glossy and damning. There was Lucas holding hands with Brianna outside the department store. There was Lucas kissing her forehead in the parking lot. And there, right on top, was the photo of them standing in front of the white vintage crib, Brianna's hand resting protectively on her stomach. Helen gasped. It was a sharp intake of breath that sucked the air out of the room. She reached out with a trembling hand and touched the photo of the crib. Lucas? Frank whispered, looking at his son with a confusion that was rapidly turning into horror. Who is that girl? Lucas's face went from pale to a deep, mottled red. He scrambled, trying to gather the photos, to hide them, as if putting them back in the envelope would make them disappear. It's not. This is a misunderstanding, he stammered, his eyes darting around the room looking for an exit. Cat, I can explain. She's a client. We were just... Stop, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't need to. Don't insult your parents' intelligence, and certainly don't insult mine. I pointed to the piece of paper that was still stuck inside the envelope. You missed one, Lucas. He pulled it out. It wasn't a photo. It was a photocopy of the prescription receipt I had found in his tennis bag, stapled to a printout of his bank withdrawals. Valacyclovir, 500 milligrams. I could almost forgive the girl, I said, looking him dead in the eye. Men your age get insecure. You want to feel young. It's a cliché, really. But what I cannot forgive, what I will never forgive, is the fact that you put my life at risk. I turned to his parents. Your son contracted a sexually transmitted disease from his mistress. And instead of telling me, instead of protecting his wife of 10 years, he hid the medication in his gym bag and continued to sleep in my bed. Helen let out a sob, covering her mouth with her napkin. She looked at Lucas not with love, but with pure revulsion. Frank slowly placed his fork down, pushing his plate away as if the food had suddenly rotted. Son, Frank said, his voice shaking with anger. Is this true? Dad, it's not. I was going to tell her, Lucas pleaded, sweat beading on his forehead. I just needed time to fix it. Fix it? I laughed, a cold, sharp sound. You were buying a crib, Lucas. You were using my money withdrawn from our joint account, to build a nest for another woman while you exposed me to infection. I stood up. I felt 10 feet tall. The weight I had been carrying for weeks was gone, dumped squarely onto his shoulders. The tax waiver you signed at dinner last night, I continued, watching the realization dawn on him. That wasn't for taxes. That was a legal acknowledgement that you have no claim to my company assets. And given the evidence on this table, the infidelity, the health risk, the prenup is ironclad. You get nothing. Lucas slumped in his chair. He looked small. The handsome, charming tennis coach was gone. All that was left was a middle-aged man who had gambled everything on a lie and lost. Mom? Dad? He tried, his voice cracking. Helen stood up. She walked over to me, her eyes filled with tears. She didn't look at her son. She took my hand. "I am so sorry, Catherine," she whispered. "I am so sorry." Then she turned to her husband. "Frank, get the bags. We're leaving. I won't stay under the same roof as him." "No, Helen," I said gently. "You and Frank stay. This is a big house. There are plenty of guest rooms in the East Wing. You are always welcome here." I looked at Lucas. He's the one who's leaving. Lucas looked around the room, the beautiful china, the candlelight, the family he had destroyed. "Cat, please," he whispered. "Where am I supposed to go?" "I hear Brianna is looking for a crib," I said, picking up my wine glass and finally taking a sip. It tasted like victory. "Maybe you can sleep in it." The divorce proceedings were less of a battle and more of an autopsy. I sat in the conference room of my lawyer's firm in downtown Boston. The mahogany table was vast, separating me from Lucas. He looked 10 years older than he had just a week ago. His tan seemed to have faded, leaving his skin sallow. He was wearing a suit that I had bought him, but it hung loosely on his frame now. "So," my lawyer Marcus said, adjusting his glasses, "we have the post-nuptial amendment signed by Mr. Hale on the 14th of this month. We have the medical records subpoenaed regarding the undisclosed STI, and we have the documented infidelity." Marcus slid a single piece of paper across the table. "Based on the terms Mr. Hale agreed to, he is leaving the marriage with the assets he brought into it, which, according to our forensic accounting, amounts to a checked bag of personal clothing and a 2015 sedan." Lucas stared at the paper. His hands were clenched into fists on his lap. "I can't live on nothing, Catherine," he said, his voice ragged. "I have expenses. I have a child on the way." I didn't blink. "That sounds like a you problem, Lucas, not a me problem." "You can't do this," he spat, a flash of his old arrogance surfacing. "I'll sue. I'll go to the press. I'll tell them." "Tell them what?" I interrupted, leaning forward. "That you infected your wife with herpes while cheating on her with the front desk girl? That you tried to swindle me? Go ahead, Lucas. I'm a behind-the-scenes executive. You're a public-facing tennis coach. Who do you think loses more in the court of public opinion?" He shut his mouth. He knew I was right. The final blow came 2 hours later, after the papers were signed and he was escorted out of the building. I went to the club to clear out his locker, a final act of closure I insisted on doing myself. I didn't want him coming back there. As I walked through the lobby, the club manager David intercepted me. "Mrs. Hale," he said, looking uncomfortable. "I just wanted to let you know, we terminated Lucas's contract this morning, violation of the moral clause. And, well, Brianna resigned too." "Did she?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "Yes, although it was quite a scene." David lowered his voice, leaning in. "Apparently, when she found out his credit cards were declined at the baby boutique this morning, she came in screaming, said something about him being a broke loser who lied about his net worth. She threw her ring at him in the parking lot." I felt a cold, hard satisfaction settle in my chest. It wasn't happiness exactly. It was the feeling of a balanced equation. Brianna hadn't wanted Lucas. She wanted the lifestyle Lucas projected, my lifestyle. Once the funding was cut, the romance evaporated. The baby, if there even was one, would be Lucas's burden to bear alone, without my checkbook to cushion the fall. I walked into the locker room. I packed his rackets, his shoes, and his clothes into a cardboard box. At the bottom of the locker, I found a small velvet box. Inside was a diamond bracelet. It was cheap, likely bought with the cash withdrawals he had made from our account weeks ago. He had probably intended to give it to Brianna. I snapped the box shut and tossed it into the trash can on my way out. I walked out of the club and into the crisp Boston air. The sun was shining. The sky was a piercing, brilliant blue. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs. For the first time in months, the air didn't taste like betrayal. It tasted like freedom. I took out my phone and blocked Lucas's number. Then I called the travel agent I used for corporate retreats. "Hi, it's Catherine. That conference in Zurich next month? Book me a ticket, first class, and extend the stay by a week. I think I'm overdue for a vacation." 6 months later, the air in the Swiss Alps was crisp enough to wake the dead. I sat on the terrace of a small cafe halfway up the mountain, a thick wool blanket draped over my lap. Below me, the valley was a patchwork of green and white, dotted with chalets that looked like toys. I took a sip of my espresso. It was strong, bitter, and perfect. My phone buzzed on the wooden table. It was a message from Sam back in Boston. Sam, just saw the Q3 reports. Stock is up 12%. You're a wizard, cat. Also, heard through the grapevine that Elle is working as an assistant coach at a public rec center in Jersey. Thought you'd want to know. I looked at the message. Jersey. A public recreation center. It was a long fall from the clay courts of the private club and the master suite of a Beacon Hill mansion. I felt nothing. No spike of joy, no pang of pity. Just a neutral acknowledgement of a fact. Like hearing it was going to rain in a city I no longer lived in. I typed back, "Thanks, Sam. Dinner when I get back?" I put the phone down, screen side down. I didn't want to look at the past anymore. I was too busy admiring the view. Is this seat taken? I looked up. A man was standing there, holding a tray with a pot of tea and a book. He was about my age, maybe a few years older. He had silver hair, kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, and he was wearing a worn, comfortable sweater that had clearly seen many winters. "No," I said, gesturing to the empty chair. "Please." He sat down. He didn't try to charm me. He didn't scan my clothes to estimate my net worth. He just poured his tea. "That's a heavy read for a vacation," he noted, nodding at the quarterly medical journal I had been skimming. "Old habits," I smiled, closing the magazine. "I'm Catherine." "Robert," he said, offering a hand. His grip was warm and firm. "I'm a retired history professor. I come here to read and pretend I'm going to write a book." We talked. We talked for 2 hours. We didn't talk about stocks or scandals or ex-husbands who bought cribs for mistresses. We talked about the history of the region, the best place to find chocolate in the village, and the strange relief of silence. For the first time in a decade, I didn't feel like a provider. I didn't feel like a bank account or a safety net. I felt like a woman sitting on a mountain, breathing air that belonged only to her. I remembered the prescription receipt, the pill that had started it all. In a strange way, I was grateful for it. That tiny, jagged pill had been the bitter medicine I needed to cure a sickness I didn't know I had, the sickness of settling for less than I was worth. The sun began to dip behind the peaks, casting long, violet shadows across the snow. "It gets cold quickly up here," Robert said, gathering his things. "Would you like to join me for dinner later? The lodge makes an excellent fondue." I looked at him. I saw kindness. I saw intelligence. And most importantly, I saw a man who was complete on his own, just as I was. "I'd love to," I said. I watched him walk away, then turned back to the valley. I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold, clean air. I was 58 years old. I was single. I was scarred. But as I watched the first stars appear in the twilight sky, I realized something profound. I wasn't waiting anymore. The game was over. And for the first time in my life, I had won the only prize that mattered: myself. Peace is a strange sensation when you have lived in a state of high alert for so long. For years, silence in my house meant secrets were being kept. Now silence just means the world is resting. I sat by the window of the lodge, watching the morning sun hit the snow-capped peaks. The light was golden, thick like honey, pouring over the jagged edges of the mountain and softening them. On the table next to me, a single flower sat in a glass vase, an Edelweiss. Robert had picked it for me on our hike yesterday. He hadn't bought me a diamond bracelet to apologize for a mistake. He had simply found something resilient that grew in the cold and thought of me. I picked up my pen and opened my journal. For months I had been writing down plans, strategies, and legal defenses. Today the page was blank. It wasn't empty because I had nothing to do. It was empty because I finally had the freedom to do whatever I wanted. I thought about the woman I was a year ago, shivering in a garage, clutching a blister pack of pills, terrified that her life was over because she was nearly 60 and alone. I wanted to reach back through time, hold her hand, and tell her, "Just wait. The winter is harsh, but you are made of stronger stuff than you know." I took a sip of my tea. Steam curled up against the cold window pane. Down on the path below, I saw Robert walking his dog, his breath visible in the crisp air. He looked up, saw me in the window, and waved. It was a simple gesture, undemanding and kind. I waved back. I wasn't starting over. That phrase implies I had lost everything. I hadn't lost myself. I had uncovered myself. The heavy layers of obligation, fear, and pretense had melted away, leaving something lighter, truer, and infinitely more joyful. The waiting game was done. Now it was time to live.